Welcome, everyone. This is our first ever late night chat with two partners here at the Forward Party. Sophia from the Texas Voter Project and Mike is running for lieutenant governor. I think we've got some people joining us that know either one or the other or are longtime Forward Party members. So this is really great that we can bring together a couple different groups and have a conversation tonight. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sophia and Mike. And Sophia's going to tell me when to click the button to go to the next slides. But welcome, everyone, and I'll turn it over to you, Sophia.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for hosting this and for having both of us participate. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I think it should be pretty insightful for all of us. Well, Mike, you're here tonight because you made a really interesting decision. After 20 years of hitting a historic low for the number of registered independents in the country, this past year we hit a record high. So you can go ahead and show us the next slide, Brandon. We have a brand new Gallup poll that came out that shows the highest number of registered independents in U.S. history. And while Texas statewide races are still heavily dominated by Republicans, I mean, a Democrat hasn't won statewide since the 1990s, before I was even born. Independents still are going to face a lot of major structural barriers across the country. And I want to start first with what brought about your decision to run outside of the two-party system.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words this evening. I really appreciate it. Running for lieutenant governor as an independent, it's very hard if you want to run as an independent. So I did not choose the easiest path to electoral success. But first of all, I've never held office. I have run for office, and each time I have stepped up to run for office, it was to solve a problem. It's just in my DNA. I mean, to be a problem solver. And one of the problems we have to solve, and it involves something that I absolutely cherish and I'm worried about, is democracy and politics. And so my perspective on politics is as somebody who was raised in the Republican world. I'm in the business world. And about 13 or 14 years ago, I decided that I really wasn't a Republican for reasons we can discuss if you're interested. But I phoned up the Democrats to see if they had any interest in my getting involved in helping. We had problems we needed to solve in the state, particularly public education, something I'm very passionate about. And so now I think to myself, okay, what's the biggest problem that we face? The biggest problem that we face is a two-party system with two parties at war with each other. And so compromise is no longer thought of. And policy rarely makes it into the debate. And I can think of an example after example after example after example. We can all see it. And there's nothing that's going to bring them back together to where that they can compromise again. In my opinion, I've seen how parties work. This partisan war is forever. But it can't be, because we're losing speed and altitude as a country. And on so many levels, you can see it. So how do we solve this problem? This might be the problem of the ages. Well, there might be more than one way to solve it, but I can think of a way that I can help. I can think of a way that it can be solved. And I can think of a way that I can contribute meaningfully to the solution, which is to jump out there and have the courage to run as an independent. And let me tell you something. When I announced that I was running as an independent, it was just as hard as I thought it would be in terms of suffering the slings and arrows, the people who were surprised and disappointed. And it was one of the hardest and saddest things I've ever done. However, it was the right thing to do. And I feel very energized. And now, and by the way, I did this without consulting this data. And so I didn't say, well, there's more independence, and so I'm going to seize this opportunity. This is my way to slide into office. It was really quite the opposite. It was, this has to be done. It's the hardest possible approach if you're thinking statewide office. And I hope anybody's out there that can help me. And I don't know whether they are, but we're going to find out. And we're finding that there are a lot of people who see the world the way I do, and the support is terrific. Might be a bit of a long answer. You're thinking, how many questions can we pack into 20 minutes? And so I'm sorry, but that's the most important of all, I think. So
No, I agree.
Thank you for indulging me.
It's very important. And I think, it's kind of peculiar for some people. This is a big statewide office. We haven't seen independents run for these and have, a real chance. And I mean, the reason I'm here tonight is because out of this data, we learned that a record number of young people, for the first time in history, more than half of young people are now registering independent of party. But they're also the least likely to vote. So I'm glad that you mentioned that you decided to make this move before looking at the data, because registering independent doesn't necessarily mean, or running as an independent doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get all of those votes. But this is really important data to me, because traditional party outreach focuses primarily on turning out their own voters. Democrats work on turning out Democrats, Republicans work on turning out Republicans. And if that continues, 50% or more of young voters will likely be left out. From your experience, from what you've seen, why do you think it is that young people aren't voting? And what do you think your campaign can do to change that?
Well, it's trust. It's an issue of trust, in my opinion. I sense that young people just really don't trust the two parties and the governmental institutions. I mean, you pick up the newspaper, you watch TV, and the dreadful decisions, the dishonest behavior. You can't believe the spin. You can't believe the nonsense. You're not really sure what's true and what isn't true, because one party will say something and another party will say the exact opposite. And unless you have a lot of leisure and access to all sorts of data, you're not really sure who to believe. And then you read about the corruption, which is just off the charts. And then you put that in the context of a country where you got really, really rich people that are just coining it and everybody else is struggling. And you step back and you say, I just don't trust. I just don't trust the system. One of the things I've said many times is on the campaign trail is, I'm an independent, so you know who to trust. If you think about it, I can't possibly be accused of being dishonest so that I could advance the interest of my party in exchange for my party giving me a leg up to a higher office. And so if you want to know who to trust, I think you have to be an independent. And I'm not going to say bad, people want to be Republicans and they want to be Democrats and they like their party, and that's fine. Of course they do, and that's fine. So I'm not going to say much to criticize the parties or the individuals in them, except to say that it isn't working. But I will say this: who do you trust? And one of the reasons why I'm very excited that there are many independents running for office. I've met some, thanks to Brandon, and I'll be meeting many more this coming weekend. I think we're onto something. And I would love to see a world where instead of saying, well, this person's running for is an independent because he's flaky and they never win, I would love for it to be, let's vote for the independent. It's the person you can trust, the statesman. It's the harder path to success. I want somebody who's really going to put it on the line, be as honest as they can be, take the blows and see if they can't round up and earn people's trust.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Brandon, I think you can switch to the next slide, because I'm pretty sure, it's public trust, as you were just mentioning, is one of the most well-documented declining trends in American political history. It is continually getting worse and worse and worse. And so this question of who to trust, if most young people aren't choosing between candidates, they're choosing whether to engage at all, because they're deciding whether they even trust the system that they're being asked to participate in. And
right.
Actually, a lot of trust comes from understanding and knowledge. I think that most young people probably couldn't tell you what the lieutenant governor actually does, but it is one of the most powerful roles, if not the most powerful role in Texas. What decisions could you make in that role that would directly impact the lives of young voters?
Well, I'm glad you raised that. It's very important. It's a very important part of my campaign to help, folks understand what the job is. The lieutenant governor is not like the vice president. You think of the vice president of the United States, and it's easy to say, well, lieutenant governor must be like the vice governor. And we think of the vice president as just waiting for their moment, but otherwise have very little impact. It's nothing of the sort in Texas. The lieutenant governor is a constitutional position, president of the Texas Senate, not elected in a ticket, elected in their own right. It was designed back in the late 1800s because they wanted the Senate to be as powerful as they could be because they didn't trust their governors, and it had to do with Reconstruction and complexity, which is probably we'll deal with in another time. But they wanted the power in the state to reside in the Senate, and they wanted to have a statewide officer elected by the people who would be the president of the Senate. Now, what does that mean from a policy standpoint? If you're a young person, I think it's safe to say that when it comes to the legislation, when it comes to laws, when it comes to everything we do as a state, if the lieutenant governor's for it, it's likely to pass. And if the lieutenant governor's against it, it's not likely to pass. So pick any issue that folks are concerned about, and the lieutenant governor can have tremendous influence on the course of legislation. Now, of course, the governor has to sign whatever they do. And I've known some lieutenant governors, and I've known some governors, and they've kind of told me how this works, which is on day one, the lieutenant governor ought to wander over to the governor's mansion and say, what are you trying to accomplish? Let me tell you what I'm trying to accomplish. And so let's figure out what we can get done here. So pick any issue. There's two that come immediately to my mind. Education. I often think of public education and K through 12, but let's don't forget about college.
Yeah.
And the cost of college in Texas, when I went to college, it was dirt cheap because the state said, let's do our young people a favor and give them a great education without tons and tons of debt. What happened? I could explain chapter and verse. But we went down the wrong path. Greed did it to us. I don't like that. So that's a terrific example. And I could talk all day long in universities. Let people be free to decide what they want to study. Let professors be free to decide what they want to teach.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, we could talk all day long about that. The other thing is climate. Let's talk about climate. It may surprise viewers to know because I made my living in the energy industry. But lots of us in the energy industry are thinking to ourselves, we're not going to make it in terms of what we're doing to our planet. And we happen to be, mindful of the energy process and how the pieces fit together. And so you got to supply energy, but you got to do it in a way that doesn't destroy our planet. Now, are we doing the right things there? My personal opinion is it's gross negligence. The lieutenant governor can have a lot to say about that. And finally, I toggle between which is the most important to me because there are about 4 or 5 things that I'm really passionate about. But I'm very passionate about political reform, term limits. And I've seen the dreadful inside game of politics. The longer you stay, the more powerful you can be, and the more corrupt you can be, and the more lies you can get away with, and the more deals you can cut with unsavory characters. I think of term limits. I think gerrymandering is a cancer on our democracy. And then campaign finance.
I'm so grateful.
Lieutenant governor can have a tremendous influence on all of the above.
I'm super grateful that you actually mentioned that very last one, because I had a question come in from someone who was not able to join us tonight about things like campaign finance reform and election reforms that would make accessibility to elections a lot easier, but also kind of keep this greed and corruption out. So I'm super happy that you touched on that. I know that's a really big issue for young people, especially. Brandon, if you could go to the next slide. There's a lot of research being done on where young people are at. And, one of the topics we want to talk about is the fact that young people just aren't joining the parties anymore. And I think people are thinking maybe, that's a failure of democracy, a failure of the parties, whatever it is. But the truth is that from a lot of these surveys and the research that's being done, that young people, it's not that they're apathetic. People care a lot about these issues and about the issues that you just mentioned. It's just that they're relatively disengaged from civic action. We have made it harder and harder to participate in things outside of just your home life and your work life, to meet each other in public. But they also feel like their needs have not been met by the political institutions that we have. This is a generation that has really only experienced a political system that's been characterized by intense polarization and dysfunction. And that experience contributes to their cynicism and the sense that democracy is not delivering for them. And I think it's incredibly important that we talk about those things, not just in a way of, we need to convince young people that democracy is worth fighting for, but rather acknowledge those frustrations and those challenges that they have felt and then they've seen. But, coming together, and what you were just talking about, doesn't necessarily, not all independents are moderates, right? They don't meet in the middle of every policy and every issue. Well, often they're all over the place, and maybe they lean one way or the other, but they are not interested in wearing that political jersey, the one party's jersey or the other. I am curious, what are some of your more conservative positions and what are some of your more progressive positions?
Fabulous question. I consider myself a fiscal conservative. I have described myself as a fiscal conservative, social moderate. But I think of myself as an old-timey fiscal conservative. The word conservative now has changed meaning like you can't believe. In an earlier era, when I was young, cuando era más joven, if anybody speaks Spanish, to be conservative meant to be pragmatic. It meant to be honest. It meant to fight corruption. It meant let's fund the programs that make a difference in people's lives, but let's try to do it efficiently and effectively. And then when it comes to the burden of paying for that, make sure that that's fair. And above all, let's be honest and let's have an honest discussion. That's what conservative means to me. I mean, I think if you overtax people, then it has an impact on our economy. And I think at the end of the day, everybody wants a good paying job. And so creating jobs is a very, very important part of policymaking, but it also has to be fair. So the old timey word conservative had fair baked into it. There's a party out there. I'm not going to pick on parties, but there is a party that describes itself as conservative. And I don't see a thing conservative about it. And let me give you one example. Tearing down public education, and that's where our students are. Tearing it down is not conservative, it's radical. It's not right. So I think of myself as a fiscal conservative. On the progressive side, I believe in freedom. And so you talk about a woman's right to make decisions and have agency in terms of her own body and healthcare. And by the way, lots and lots of Republicans agree with me on this. The fact that we have gone so far in the direction of taking away a woman's right to make these decisions is a large number of Republicans, as surely as Democrats and independents, who are saying, look, we have to trust people to make their own decisions. And then when I think of, in terms of the LGBT community, I've said many times in previous campaigns, you have to be able to live and love as you wish. And America is all about freedom. And then show folks a little bit of respect. Not a little bit of respect. I mean that in a rhetorical sense. I mean, show them a lot of respect. So when it comes to freedom and giving people individual agency, I think I'm quite progressive. Yeah, another great example is THC. I mean, that's going to come up. I'm not opposed to THC. If we could roll back time, you guys were teasing me about how gray I've turned. Before I had a single gray hair in my head, I was on the UT campus in the 70s, and Pink Floyd was all the rage. Now you do the rest of that math. So
I think that's a winning message for quite a few young people, if I'm guessing correctly. Brandon, if you want to switch to the next slide, I think that's very in line with where a lot of people fall, to be honest. I hear a lot of my own friends say that they have similar viewpoints, that they just don't feel really represented by either party because they might, believe in gun ownership, but also believe that women should have access to abortions. And that inability to find a place in either party because of those complex decisions and dynamic viewpoints makes it really hard for them. And so having somebody who is independent of these parties and the structures and the framework that they're stuck in, I think is really helpful. The other thing is that young people have expressed deep dissatisfaction, not only with the institutions, but with the political parties themselves, and for those reasons that we're talking about. And I think, we teeter into this a little bit when we start to talk about messaging and how we communicate these things to different generations and to voters who are disengaged but care deeply about these issues. I think there's been research by John Hopkins that's been done that shows that older generations are more likely to characterize their opponents in moralistic terms as evil. As we've become more partisan, but our parties have become weaker, there's a lot of difficulty with tribalism and feeling like there's nowhere that you actually belong. As you get older, you become more tied to your party identity and it becomes part of who you are. But when you're younger, you often feel like you can float in these spaces and kind of exist in one or the other. When you are trying to communicate, because you're going to have, as an independent, you have a little bit of a knowledge gap to get over, right? Most young voters don't have these shortcuts that the party offered to older generations to rely on. It's easy to pick your side and vote down the ballot. The burden of understanding the ballot is much higher. And that's a lot of the work that I focus on is closing that political knowledge gap. But how are you making it easier for someone actually to make this decision when it comes time for the election? And what kind of messaging are you going to be using to try to communicate to voters who may feel really, really turned off by these institutions and these parties and democracy and government as a whole?
Well, it's a great question, Sophia, and I can tell you that I have a lot of work to do. But by that I mean, if you have the nomination of a major party, you start out before anybody knows who you are, close to 50%, because voters are busy in their lives and they're not really sure. They'll pay very close attention to, for example, is running for Senate. And they'll make an independent point of view, but then they very quickly will say, well, I don't know. I haven't had time. I'm not really sure I know this person, but I always vote D or I always vote R. So if you're running as an independent, you're inviting people to listen to what you have to say, but you also got to get out there. I mean, you've got to campaign very, very aggressively and tell your story. Now, everyone has their own campaign style. When I was the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor, Beto O'Rourke and I were, always showing up on the same stage. And we have very, very, very different styles of communicating. And I have to be me, so I'm not going to try to be somebody that I'm not. But what I found is in
You want to build a skateboard?
No, I'd probably end up in the hospital. But no, I would say folks may be too young for this. If you've heard of the Rolling Stones, the best compliment that's ever been paid to me campaigning was Texas Monthly said I reminded him of at a Beto rally. I reminded him of Mick Jagger, this old guy that prancing back and forth and getting the crowd all riled up. That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. So, no, what I found is, there's a handful of things in Texas policy that motivate me to do this that I'm very passionate about. They're not difficult to explain. I think I'm in the majority. I find that people say, yeah, me too, Mike. Me too. Yep, me too, Mike. And then the other thing is, you can go out there and say, can't we all get along? But you can also go out there and tell jokes and entertain people and bring a joy and a lightness to this. And for me, that works beautifully. I'm a pretty dadgum lighthearted guy. I love humor. And I'm not saying I'm good at it, but I love humor. But deep down inside, I'm an optimist. I really do think we're going to get to the other side. And I do find it very joyful to be in the company of people who, we're all trying to do the same thing here. So, but I can't, be a stand-up comedian and expect to get elected lieutenant governor. I have to work very hard to all the means of communicating. And, if you're a candidate, old people like me get their information in a different way than young people do. And so you have to make sure that you're using all of those media effectively so that people hear your voice. But I'll say one last thing, and I might have already said this, but if you're, and a really smart old veteran told me this, if you're the nominee of a party, this person said to me, Mike, brace yourself because people will come up to you and tell you what you think. And they won't be terribly interested in hearing what you think you think. Does that make sense?
It does.
Because of how, parties influence people's perceptions and so forth. If you're an independent, you're a mystery, and you're inviting people to, sit down and let's talk. And then they find out about you. So
I'm really glad that you focus on joy in your campaign. I think that's really important. I know that my generation tends to be a lot more cynical, but having this strategy of like hammering, responsibility and, your duty to vote into young people doesn't really work as well anymore because we've kind of lost touch with that community. And so having something to be enthusiastic about is likely to build more long-term buy-in from young people, and to have something that, we're excited about the change that you're offering and not just that you're attacking one side or the other back and forth and, calling the other side bad or bankrupt for whatever reason, that you actually offer something positive for young people to look forward to and to be excited about. So I'm really glad that you like to incorporate joy into this.
Well, thank you. If I could just layer one thing onto that, I really do believe my point of view is the majority point of view. And in a democracy, selling the majority point of view doesn't have to be all that difficult. It's when you're trying to cram bad policy down people's throats and you're not being honest about it and you're manipulating the system and you're doing all these dreadful things. If you represent the majority point of view, and there is a majority point of view on all of these issues, it is joyful. You don't have to bash anybody. For example, I don't have to tell people that why I think Dan Patrick's the wrong person for the lieutenant governor job. He's done it already. That's probably the meanest thing you're ever going to hear me say. My job is not to go down there and attack anybody, particularly as an independent. If you are a partisan in a party, you're required to attack. You don't dare say anything nice about the other side. You don't dare agree with some things, but wait, I disagree on other things. Your job is to tear everything down. You will never hear. You remember the time that Beto O'Rourke, and I wish I could remember the fellow's name. It'll come back to me. 2 congressmen out in West Texas, and we had bad weather, and they rode together in their car to get to Washington. Do you remember this was about 10 years ago? And you had a Democrat and a Republican congressman who got together in an automobile, God help us, and drove joyfully together to Washington. And both were just beaten up so badly by their parties. How dare you spend your time, on the camera with that person? And I personally just don't want to have anything to do with that. I could get elected and be the loneliest person I ever met. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. I'm not afraid of anything.
It makes it really difficult to achieve any kind of policy changes if you're unwilling to talk to the other side, right?
Oh, you can't. Yeah, you can't compromise. I mean, look what's happening. You try to catch a flight in the last 2 weeks. TSA, a 4-hour wait, United States of America, the greatest, most technologically advanced country in the nation. And we can't do that simple stuff because it required compromise, and compromise is no longer thought of.
Yeah. I think there's someone else in this statewide election that is kind of sharing in your values a little bit. He's running as a Democrat, but he has a message that is very similar about bringing people together and looking at who's really responsible for the issues that we have. And it's not just the people on the other side of the aisle. And, I think that would be James Tallarico. And I think we have some slides here that's going to show our primary turnout data. So the first one we have here is the Republican primary turnout data. And the thing that, of course, I want to look at, being who I am and what I do, is that light blue line, that under 30. It's only 2% of the Republican primary turnout voters were people under 30. And I think we have to be honest that that's got to be a little bit of a red flag, a canary in the coal mine for the Republican Party here in Texas. But if we look at turnout data for the Democratic Party on the next slide, we see a massive jump, not only in the percentage from 2 to 8%, but actually in the raw numbers as well. I think it nearly triples, almost quadruples the number of young people that are showing up in the Democratic primary. Then we've seen, though, young people turn out to vote for specific candidates, but not down ballot. And what this data doesn't show is that drop off between James Tallarico for Senate and the governor's race, which is, the next most important thing on the ballot. It's 1 million people that drop off in voting. And so I think, there's a fear for both the Republican Party and just who's turning out in their election and not capturing those young people. But I worry also that the Democrats here are going to be a little over enthusiastic and excited about these raw numbers and not pay quite as much attention to that down ballot drop off that we're seeing. And so how do you think that translates? There's young people are not looking to parties for the indicators of who to vote for, right? We can assume that they're looking at the candidate at the top of the ticket who got them really excited. We talk about James Tallarico in this particular instance and his message of unity and coming together. And again, not necessarily does that mean being more moderate. He has a very progressive platform. But how do you convert this interest in a candidate into actual voting behavior across the ballot?
Yeah, well, it's the $64,000 question, I can tell you. Having run, as the lieutenant governor with Beto O'Rourke at the top of the ticket, the challenge is how do we over here? Look at me! Look at me! Look at me! First of all, I'd like to say this before I answer the question or try to answer the question. You'd much rather have the problem of lots and lots of young people who only vote at the top of the ticket than go home than no young people anywhere on the scene, I think. So I think you use the word canary in the coal mine. I think that's really quite true. No, I think as a practical matter, I think one of the reasons why people drop off is because they're busy in their lives and they only have so much bandwidth to devote to politics. And so they reach a very, very important conclusion as it relates to the top of the ticket. But that's really all the time that they have to invest in politics. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's good that they're busy in their lives, but the top of the ticket attracts their attention and they come in and vote. One of the things that is an advantage to Republicans is we have this joke up here where I live in Kingwood, Texas, outside of Houston. It's a very Republican enclave. And they say that every Saturday morning, 52 Saturdays a year, the Republicans wake up, they drive to the poll to make sure there's not a Democrat to vote against, and then they go play golf or go shopping or whatever. So there's very much a cultural thing. It's also linked to the age. So and we've seen this in 2018 when I was on the ballot. We saw this in a big way, that folks would make a conscious decision as to the top of the ticket. And then they would go home to their party because they just don't have time. I really don't know these people, but my party usually gives me a good candidate. And so what do you do about it? Well, if you're a down ballot candidate, first of all, there's a reward for being a good candidate. And a good candidate is somebody who works unbelievably hard, who's on the phone all day long, hones the message, has really talented staff around them who know how to translate polling data into media selection. It's technically very challenging. It feels very much like running a business. And so the better candidate, you need to have really, really good candidates. And we have some really good candidates. When I say we, I mean we as Texans. I'm not pointing to a particular party. I'm trying to stay out of it these days, but you can see there are some candidates who are stronger than others. I will say this, one of the challenges that Forward Party and independents face is infrastructure creates better candidates.
Mhm.
because you have institutional knowledge and you have people that know each other and they've worked together in previous campaigns. And one of the things that really I'm enthusiastic about with my relatively new relationship with the Forward Party is that infrastructure is coming together. Not only is that very valuable, but then if you look at what is the Forward Party's platform, it's not we're fighting for these 5 policies, you're either in it with us or against us, but we're fighting for the ideals that our democracy was built around. That's never been done before, and that's very, very attractive. So we're seeing an infrastructure. In other words, you don't have to agree with my policies. There's room in the Forward Party for all of the above, as long as you're true to the Constitution, true to serving your community and doing it honestly. And so that's that's why I'm very enthusiastic. And people that are listening and might have an interest in joining the Forward Party, I would say come on, because every person that joins increases the size and scope of the infrastructure that inures to the benefit of every independent candidate, and the focus is on our values in this republic as contrasted to partisan warfare policy fights.
Well, I'm super, honestly, you've done such a good job of segueing me into all of my next questions. And this is actually perfect. This is my last one. And I'm going to open it up also to Brandon, because this is a larger question. So it's, how does this candidacy actually change the system, not this election? If you win, what would you structurally do so that young people don't have to rely on individual motivation to participate? And what is the lasting impact that even if you lose, it will have this candidacy will have on, the Forward Party and independents who want to run in the future, or people who are independent thinkers who want to have more options on the ballot?
Well, I love the question. I'll answer them in reverse order. What if I lose? I don't think I'm unique in the following. You see a challenge, it feels like a great big wheel, and we have to turn the wheel. And there's already 5 or 6 people with their shoulder, and they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing. So I'm going to jump in and I'm going to push on that wheel too. And we want to get that wheel turning. And, you might win. You might not win. The winning is important. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not doing this to lose, but the more important motivation is let's get that wheel turning. That's what this is all about. If you are running for office and you get bad news on election day, it's not all bad. You think, what have I accomplished, and how am I going to go back and contribute again and keep that wheel going? So I personally am very devoted to, because I think this is the solution. I love my country, and I'm old enough to have seen a large portion of it, and I've seen it change a lot in a way that is very concerning to me. And I think there might be more than one solution, but I can see a solution. This is the one that I want to work on. So I don't fear losing. Now, I'm not in it to lose. I'm in it to win. The win scenario gets very interesting if you think about it. First of all, I think it will be an absolute earthquake in terms of national politics, because the perception is that Texas is pure Republican. Don't waste your time. And so if you have the most powerful Republican in the most powerful Republican state get beat by an independent whose only claim to fame is he's an accountant with a sense of humor, what that does, I think that will send a message to every politician in the country, which is that if you focus on partisan warfare, you might get beat. So don't do that anymore. Second, the reforms that I have in mind, gerrymandering, for example, if you can ungerrymander the state, then politicians would behave so much differently. There'd be a penalty for being dishonest if you had to compete every time you come up for election, and it's not just handed to you on a silver platter. When a politician takes a microphone or goes on TV and lies through his teeth, it's because he thinks he can. He's not worried about the next election.
Yep.
Well, if you're worried about the next election, and gerrymandering does this, it's probably the worst. I call it a cancer. It's probably the worst. If we can unwind gerrymandering, go to an independent redistricting commission where we're not electing partisan warriors, we're electing statesmen and stateswomen,
Mm-hmm.
That is a lasting benefit. Now, if you're a young person, you're much more likely to hear candidate A tell the truth, maybe a different point of view, candidate B telling the truth, a competing point of view, and arguing the basis for their point of view. And now you get to choose. And that's the healthiest we can make democracy. So I'll say one other thing. My sense is in the Senate, which would be where I spend my time and effort, I think they are would like to be much more consensus oriented than they have been allowed to be.
Mm-hmm.
If the president of the Senate is an independent, then it frees a lot of people from the requirement to be hyperpartisan. The mere fact that you have an independent who's asking, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? As contrasted to, I'm the lieutenant governor. You'll do this, you'll do that, you'll do this, or I'll raise money and primary you. I think that in and of itself will have a tremendous impact on the whole feeling of our state and how it works in democracy. And I suppose if I was a young person, I'd be much more attracted to take an interest in and get involved in that world.
Yeah. And to bring it back to the Forward Party, who's wonderfully hosting this for us, what is the impact that it has on independent politics and the Forward Party in specific?
Is that for me or is that for Brandon?
I mean, either of you can really take it.
I would love to hear what Mike says.
Okay, let me tell you something. You know the bully pulpit? I'm sure that's a familiar expression. It was, I love to read history books. I'm not smart enough to call myself an historian, but I love to read history books. And Theodore Roosevelt, when he said bully pulpit, he wasn't thinking bully as in somebody who beats you up in the playground. He was thinking bully as in joyful. And when he talked about the bully pulpit, it was like, look, people are going to listen to me and we can do some good things here. Lieutenant governor has one heck of a bully pulpit. And these issues that come up, the lieutenant governor can say, this is my point of view. What is your point of view? Let's work together to find a good answer. And so that goes back to the Forward Party. Now, not to get too technical on this, but in order for me to get on the ballot, which is not assured, I'm working on it. I've got to get 82,000 signatures. Nothing easy about that. The Forward Party is going to need to get 82,000 signatures when it's time to have an actual Forward Party candidate. And what I've said to Brandon is that I am so bought in and such a believer. If I'm elected as an independent, as a lieutenant governor, then I'll have a bully pulpit that can attract attention to the Forward Party and what the Forward Party stands for, and make it a whole lot easier for the next independent statewide candidate to round up those signatures. And once the party rounds up the signatures and does well on the ballot, then the party exists and Forward Party candidates can run anywhere in the state. And that's very consequential. So what I've said to Brandon is, for all the help I can get now, I'll give all the help that I possibly can to achieve that objective.
Brandon, does it feel like a good trade-off to you?
It sounds like a great trade-off. And it's to Mike's point about the bully pulpit. I wanted to show this slide. One, I was going to make a joke that I wasn't sure if Sophia and Mike were ready to give us a rousing speech this weekend. So I thought, tricking them into doing a session tonight would at least let us test them out and let them hone their message. But for me, the biggest thing is it wasn't that hard to get this group of speakers together to come meet and talk to the Forward Party and other community leaders. And every day, one of our county chairs, a precinct chair, one of the candidates says, oh, can so-and-so come? We have other independent candidates that have heard about this. And what I think is just really special about this is, to Mike's point, community leaders, public servants, civic servants that are trying to do what's right for Texas, what's right for their community or right for the United States, they have that joy. And I've in the course of 3 or 4 months, I've met most of these individuals because I talked to someone else and they said, you should talk to Sophia. I mean, Sophia and I actually are neighbors. Like, we live in the same neighborhood. But there's a whole bunch of other community leaders here in Austin that someone's like says, you should talk to this civic servant. And it's amazing how many people there are out there, whether you call them independent thinkers, community leaders, that are trying to do right. And that's also the part that I think, to question Sophia, really is going to have a lasting impact. And people like Mike, William Taggart's on the call. I can see him out there. But these faces you see here are all individuals that are going to lift that up. And I like Mike's analogy of like pushing the wheel or getting that momentum going. It takes a brave soul to do it alone, but I think we're going to make it really clear. Independent thinkers aren't alone. We're not really the silent majority. We just have to figure out how we work together as a coalition. And I think Mike's candidacy and a lot of these other candidates and leaders that we're going to talk to are helping that momentum build. And that's just net positive. So I'm super excited, and I'm so appreciative that Mike is able to articulate the message the way he is. And I see him helping to champion and have other independent candidates here in 2026 be more successful in getting their message, and allow Republicans and Democrats to be more successful in delivering a message for their constituents versus having to tout the party line. So discourse democracy is good for everyone, not just one candidate or the other. And these are all things that the people on this call, the Forward Party and independents, are helping to move that needle. It's hard work, but it is super exciting.
Thank you so much for that answer. And that's all the questions that I had prepared. And I'd love to get to some of the questions that maybe got put in the chat. And if not, I have some questions that got sent in from people who couldn't join. So Zane, do you want to ask some of the questions that maybe got dropped in the chat?
Yes. All right, so we'll start with Joanne. I think that's how you pronounce it. So Republicans and Democrats have huge super PACs. They heavily rely on mainstream media to reach voters. How can independent candidates reach voters?
Well, it's a great question. It happens to be the thing that I think about the minute I'm conscious in the morning, and I take it to bed with me at night, because it takes money to communicate. I mean, it's unfortunate, but in our world, you have to find yourself in people's living rooms or where they're studying in some manner. Either it's online, or maybe you mailed them something, or maybe it's a radio program, or maybe it's TV. And so you got to have money. Now, there's a built-in advantage. Well, let me put it to you this way. There's one party that has a small number of billionaires, write huge checks, and then those billionaires get what they want. So they have an advantage. But then there's another party that has an advantage from raising money online. And so the good news is that there are plenty of people who contribute not billions, but as much as they are comfortable doing, and it adds up to lots and lots and lots and lots of money. So I would say, for example, you mentioned James Tallarico. I think I read a statistic that a lot of his campaign money is coming from smaller donors in the millions. I think it's a very good. Bernie Sanders, for example. By the way, he's an old fella, and young people love him. So I don't mind being old. Now, whether young people are going to, I ain't no Bernie Sanders, but so getting the message out is there's money involved, but there's also, and if you happen to be running as an independent in a three-way race, you don't have to get to 50%. You only have to have a third or slightly better. And so all of the polling work that I and my team have done have suggested that there is such a sufficient appetite for someone who's not a Democrat or not a Republican, that they'll stop and listen to you. In other words, it's not as hard to get your message out if there's a hunger for something like your point of view. In other words, you get people that are looking isn't there something else I can do in this election? Does it really have to be D or R? Because all those two dudes are fighting, and then here's an independent, and so they'll come find me. I do believe that will be a big part of it. And then finally, I mean, if people don't like your policies, they're going to run from you. And if they like your policies, they'll be drawn to you. And discerning the majority point of view is not that hard. And an independent can do it without any pressure or pull, no strings. If that makes any sense. And so I can project the majority point of view without offending a political party. A party won as an independent. Although thanks to the Forward Party, I don't feel lonely at all. So
we touched on this earlier in the presentation. You kind of touched on it at the end there, but specifically for young people, how do we get them to the ballot box?
Yeah, I can take that one a little bit. So there's a number of different factors that are influencing, especially young people in Texas and their decision to turn out or not. And one of the really big ones is the political knowledge gap. So that is the understanding of politics and elections that you have. And there is research that's been done that has shown that 50% of that knowledge gap, accounts for 50% of that turnout gap. So 50% of that turnout gap could be changed or modified if we just did something about the political knowledge gap. And so that's what Texas Voter Project is working on. That is that lift that Mike is going to have to do, is getting nonpartisan information about elections, just when they are, what's on your ballot, what you're voting for, to and in the hands of 18 to 35-year-olds to get them out to vote. Because a lot of what I've heard is there is, that fear about, do I have enough information to be making an accurate decision? Well, do older generations have all the information to be making a decision? No. But that doesn't stop them from turning out. So there's a little bit of a psychology there that we can actually address by creating nonpartisan, independent thinkers, of voter guides, essentially. Like, here's what you have that's coming up on your ballot, and delivering those directly to voters. And young people especially, I mean, we talk about the loneliness epidemic. It is not only a social issue, but it is a health issue, and it is by far the worst among young people. And so we can start doing things as a society and in our communities to get young people to be more a part of community. And then, when we talk about that, well, it's your responsibility to use your right to vote. That message isn't quite as strong when we don't feel that connection to our community, when we don't feel a responsibility to our community because we don't have one. And so integrating young people into community spaces, working to make sure that they're showing up to things like neighborhood associations or, run clubs or whatever it may be, creating more of those third spaces so that when it comes time to vote, young people actually feel like they have a community that they are responsible for, that they can show up for. And that's obviously a much longer build. And then, of course, having proper policy positions that are favorable, that don't feel transactional. That trust issue. Well, candidates make a lot of promises and they talk in a lot of vague terms about what they want. And then when they get elected, there's not an honest conversation about what it is that they actually have the ability to make changes in. And so I think when Mike's running and when everybody's running, being very honest about the changes that you're actually going to be able to have an impact on, those policies that you're going to actually be able to change. So I loved Mike's answer about, he's like, truthfully, Lieutenant Governor, I mean, you don't just talk about policy. You actually, every single policy that the state legislature considers has to pass through the lieutenant governor. So everything from housing to climate change to education, all of that has to go through the lieutenant governor. And so being able to actually tangibly make a change on all of those things, I think, is really helpful. So there's a number of different things that we got to do. It is a bit of a lift, but it's worth it because once you create the habit of voting, then you create lifelong voters, and you can get, especially if you're starting out from this side, we have a really good opportunity here with the highest number of registered independents to make lifelong voters of people who vote their values, not through traditional party streams.
Awesome. Chris asks, so what advice would you give to independent voters who want to be more involved in politics and sharing a message? William Taggart gave a great response, but I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Brandon, do you want to take this? Sophia?
I'll let Sophia go first.
Okay. I think that, okay. It's interesting. So I think there's two parts to this. So advice that you would give to independent voters who want to be more involved in politics. I think a lot of us who get excited and enthusiastic about getting involved, we like to try to solve every issue all at once. We get really excited and we want to join every single possible club and make the biggest change possible as fast as we can. And the truth is, nobody has the time and energy to do all of that. And you will burn yourself off by trying to go in and solve the biggest issue, that $85 million question of how do we get people to do things. And so finding your lane, finding the issue that is most important to you, I think is literally the number one piece of advice that I can give. And it could be things from, if you really care about women and immigrants, finding a group that helps women immigrants practice their English and becoming a volunteer at that organization. It could be about, decriminalizing homelessness. It could be about marijuana. It could be about making sure that the city's budget reflects the things that you think are most important to your community. It can be literally just joining your neighborhood association. Join those spaces, those issue-specific spaces, and build a community there, and then really use those issue-oriented people and kind of help them figure out which candidates to go to based on the issues that they represent and how they represent those issues. And then if you're talking about people who maybe, aren't necessarily at that point yet where they want to just join a group, but they kind of want to get a little bit more involved, I think bringing them to things where they're going to meet really local candidates or things like this where they can meet statewide candidates like Mike makes a huge difference, because once you have that personal connection, you can develop that personal connection with every candidate that's on the ballot for that position, but you can and make a better choice because of it. But once you have that personal buy-in, you have, a relationship with the people that are running, especially on the most local level, like your city council candidates, they want to get to know you. They want to know the people in their district and the issues that they're dealing with. And they are going to be the ones that are easily the most responsive to your issues when you have them. And so getting out, meeting independent candidates that, not necessarily independent, but outside of party, because, your city council in Texas are non-partisan races, and then meeting your independent candidates like Mike and being able to communicate the message that they have and the policies and the platform that they're running on. Because like we said before, being independent of the party does not necessarily being a moderate when it comes to the policies. And so being able to communicate to the people that you find that share your values, how those values are going to be represented in this position, in this office, I think is extremely important for being able to share that message, because we trust each other as messengers much more than we trust the news or podcasts or, things we see pop up on TikTok. So while those things are important, and Mike is going to have the challenge, you're going to have to be everywhere all at once, all the time to communicate your message. It is our relationships, our personal relationships, and our communication with each other and our familiar relationships that's going to help spread the messages of the values that we care about the most, the best.
Exactly like what Sophia said. Find a local candidate or a nonpartisan, or call up William Taggart if you're in his district and say, "Can I have coffee with you?" And if he doesn't have time, then go find someone that's running for city council. But making relationships with other people that want to serve is great. And then I'm saying this to everyone, there is no harm or no foul helping more candidates get on the ballot, even if they don't agree with you 100%. but get to know them and let's get more voices out there. But there is lots of opportunities just to start to learn and get to know people, and that connection with community and people who want to serve, it actually feels good because you're talking about things and change and ideas and concepts. And I see William has his hand raised. So since I did say go grab coffee with him, I'll let him rebuke that offer if I overspoke.
I'm not going to rebuke it. I'm not going to rebuke it. I'm just going to say one of your first steps is go to the local city council, go to the local commissioner's court for your county, and just sit in there and see what's happening. I mean, we are mostly unplugged from our own politics, from what's going on locally. And the first step is go in and just see what's going on. My advice is independent candidates need help. We need to do ballot petitions. The biggest help Mike could have right now is for a lot of volunteers to show up in May 27th and start signing ballot petitions to help him and myself to get on the ballot for November. That's the big thing that we're going to need first and foremost. But that's all I have to say.
Thanks, William. All right. Well, we are at time. I don't know, Zane, if there were other questions, we can take the questions and we can send them over to Sophia and Mike. And this will get posted out on YouTube. Maybe we'll do a couple clips as well. And if we have any other responses, I can add it out in the description. But with that, maybe Sophia, I'm happy to give you a couple minutes if you want to wrap it up. And then Mike, same thing if you want to have any closing sentiment. And then I'll put my plug. Both Sophia and Mike are going to be with us on Saturday. And we're going to be doing the Independent Thinkers Rally as the kickoff to our first inaugural state convention, which I couldn't be more ecstatic as far as how it's all coming together, other than it's probably going to be raining that day, but we'll see. But between that rally and us doing a reception the night before, the opportunity to get to meet people like Sophia, Mike, and a dozen other independent candidates or thought leaders in our community, I think that's a really, really special moment. And so for those that can make it out, I'd encourage you to come. And I think you're going to find this type of dialogue and discourse that we just had here is very similar to the type of personalities that the independent candidates that we have joining us have with supporters and other people in their community. So I would encourage, if you know someone in Austin or if you're nearby, try to pop into one of the events. But with that, Sophia, why don't you just give us a couple closing thoughts and then we'll let you, Mike, finish us out.
Yeah, I would love to see anybody who's available to come out to the event that Brandon just mentioned, the convention this weekend, talk a little bit more about the research that I've done regarding not independent, but young voters who tend to be more independent now and are growing that way. And I'm going to back what William also said, which is I truly, deeply believe that all politics is local. And as I bring more and more people into addressing local issues and getting involved on that local level, the more and more I realize how the state shapes what we are even able to do locally and how important it is going to be to have people who win statewide office, who support our cities and what our cities wants to do, instead of punishing what it feels like is punishing our cities for the way that they vote. And so I really do hope that we get people like Mike into office who, have flexible opinions about how things should operate and who are willing to hear from their constituents and are willing to have complex, dynamic conversations that are not just in party lenses and can address issues in our neighborhoods they're not party issues. They're not partisan issues. Filling potholes shouldn't be a partisan issue, and protecting our public parks shouldn't be a partisan issue, or, doing parking enforcement in an equitable way shouldn't be a partisan issue that the state cracks down on the local municipalities in a particular way. So, I think getting the right people into office to have these conversations is really going to create an avalanche of getting young people more invested into government and believing that government can work for the people when they see it happening. And so I'm happy to be here and be part of this conversation and share the voices of people like Mike. And so, Mike, you can go ahead and close us out.
Oh, well, I mean, that was wonderful what you, Brandon and Sophia. I'll take less than 30 seconds to just say thank you. I really, really appreciate. I'm honored to be on the call tonight. I've really enjoyed getting to know you all, William, Sophia, Brandon. There's folks, maybe I'll meet you all this weekend. I can tell you that being a candidate can be pretty lonely business. Being an independent candidate, I found can be very lonely business, which is why I'm so happy to have met the Forward Party. And by extension, there's an awful lot of people that will feel the exact same way about the Forward Party because they feel lonely too. They think about their political lives and they just don't have a place. They don't feel like they're a Republican. They don't feel like they're a Democrat. They feel lonely in their political lives. They don't need to be because most of us are like us. I really do believe that. And I'll say one last thing. I saw a lot of smiles on this call tonight. So I want to keep hanging out with you guys.
We like Mike. We like hanging out with you.
That's awesome. All right, Sophia, Mike, everyone else, thank you so much. We're going to do more of these. If you have ideas of who else you want Sophia to school, or if we have topics we want to bring back to Mike, I'm quite certain we did our job of welcoming Mike and Sophia here tonight, and I would love to do more of these. So if anyone has ideas, you can reach out to me. You can drop them. You can drop them to me anytime, or to the Forward Party at contact@texasforwardparty.com or info@texasforwardparty.org. Info@texasforwardparty.org. But Mike, Sophia, everyone else, thank you so much. Have a great evening, and we will see everyone real soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Be safe out there.